Well, look who it is, back again. Me! That's right, it's your annual video from the guy who used to do YouTube, who sometimes does still do it once a year. I'm back again. Talk about my favourite games of 2024. What a year. Bad year for the video game industry in general. Weirdly, a very good year for me in the video game industry. Published 3 video games that have all done very well, including one that got nominated for Game of the Year. What the fuck is my life? What am I even doing here? So, that was that. It was cool. But you know what's more important? The video games that I liked, that I thought were good. The most important award show. It starts right now. Before we get into it though, look, it's my list. There's some bullshit in here, and there's also some not bullshit. Some of the bullshit is me being like, well, I'm not going to put Hades 2 in because that will be out next year. But guess what? I have another early access game on this list. So what's my consistency? There is none. And that's the joy. So enjoy my top 10 games of 2024. Number 10. Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club. It is only becoming more common for companies to revive old franchises. I mean, just take a look at this year's Game Awards. But for a company to revive a franchise that is over 30 years old, that never came out in English, and is from a genre space that has seen better days, that is a far greater feat. Now look, Nintendo did bring back Famicom Detective Club a few years ago with remakes of the original games, but I'm pretty sure that those didn't shift many copies, so when Emio the Smiling Man was announced, I was frankly shocked. Emio is a strange beast of a game. On one hand, it feels very familiar and faithful to its predecessors, both in its construction and mechanics. There are creaky adventure game bones in here that feel like they could frankly snap at any moment, and sections of dialogue that go on incessantly with seemingly no point. That said, I never faced the same frustrating adventure game logic that I did with the originals, and was always able to progress without much issue. And narratively, this is by far the strongest of the 3 games. In fact, I'd be so bold as to say that the ending of this game is one of the wildest things I've ever seen in a Nintendo product, and if nothing else, you need to experience it for that alone. Number 9. Fields of Mistria. It has been over 8 years since the release of Stardew Valley, and despite many imitators, none have quite broken through to the same level of success. That isn't to say Fields of Mistria will either, but of all the games in this mold to have released in recent times, Field of Mistria feels by far the most poised to steal the crown. There are so many small quality of life things this game does to smooth out the farming sim formula, from the ability to simply jump, letting you bypass rivers by swimming through them, to the cooking and crafting allowing you to make stuff with items not in your inventory, to the fact that not getting back to bed in time doesn't result in lost items but instead lost time. So many of these little touches put together culminate in a truly streamlined experience. And that is to say nothing of the incredible art design, with characters so attractive that no matter where your preferences lie, you'll have someone that catches your eye. Fields of Mistria doesn't reinvent anything drastically, but improves and adds so much that it is hard not to fall deep down that farming rabbit hole yet again. Number 8. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. For years and years, Bally and I have cried out for Nintendo to just make a video game where you play as Zelda. As the namesake of the series, she is often present but rarely active in the narrative. So, along comes Echoes of Wisdom, and we finally get to play as the legendary princess. Though, to be honest, given the story they tell here, we might as well have been Link the whole time. While there are moments of characters interacting with Zelda that are distinct and different, the fact that she remains mute throughout makes her feel like a reskinned Link. That said, this game features on the list because at the end of the day, I think this team finally managed to nail something that previous entries had been struggling with. Namely, figuring out a way to take the more open-ended gameplay of the new mainline entries and blend that with a more traditional dungeon structure that results in something freeform but also tightly designed. I really love the ecosystem and experimenting with different weird mechanics. Do you eventually lean on the same ones? Sure, but the journey to get those favourites is littered with tests and trials of every weird thing that you find. From the trampoline to my big shielded pig boy, everyone has their favourites. I also really enjoyed the side quests and found the exploration to be far more free than any previous 2D Zelda. Overall, I think this game can illustrate a path for the upcoming big 3D game, and that makes me tremendously excited for what they do next. Number 7. UFO 50. I frankly don't believe UFO 50 exists. It is perhaps one of the most impressive games ever made and gets this high on my list despite having only touched half of the games in it for sheer ambition alone. The very idea of creating a fake company and 50, that's right, 50 games with a thematic and mechanical through line that takes you on a development journey through almost a decade of game creation is impressive enough in its own right. But the fact that so many of these games are themselves introspections on classic game design and mold experiences that I've never seen before, multiple of which could be hit independent games if released standalone, says everything that you need to know. And they are fun, like legitimately incredibly enjoyable. I've spent over 5 hours just playing Magic Garden, a simple looking but deceptively complex game where you basically play Snake but can score higher and higher using chains and combos and various hidden mechanics. Or take Paint Chase, that essentially brings Splatoon into a top-down racer to tremendous effect. Or Mortal, a game where your lives are little army men, and when they die they become platforming tools for the men to follow them. Each of these have such a strong identity in their own right, and I'm shocked and surprised every time I boot up a new one. I have so much more left to explore in UFO 50, and it feels like a game that I will keep returning to for years to come. Number 6. Neva. It has become cliché to talk about games as art. In fact, it has become cliché to say that it is cliché to talk about games as art. But you know what? Fuck that, because Neva is a goddamn piece of a fucking art. And not just in the emotional, oh it makes you cry way, because it absolutely does, but in the most obvious, just look at this thing in its absolute art kind of way. Neva is one of the most astonishing games I've ever looked at. My eyes frankly bleed at the sheer sight of it. Every frame is so vibrant and distinct that you could rotate images from it as your desktop background for the next century and not get sick of it. But also, you have a wolf and a sword, and sometimes your wolf is your sword, and goddamn if that isn't the coolest thing in the world. Studio Nomada had something special with Greece, but with Neva, they really stepped things up, creating more intricate puzzles, incredibly fun combat sequences, absolutely stunning and satisfying bosses, and big bombastic set pieces, all perfectly paced while telling a heart-wrenching story that, yes, will get the tears rolling down your face. This is also the only game where petting the dog doesn't just feel shoehorned in to get those sweet social media points, but legitimately feels like an important part of the storytelling. There are so many incredibly subtle moments delivered through animation and gameplay that make this a triumph on every single front. Number 5. Astro Bot. For the past 4 years, I've held strong that Astro's Playroom is the best game on PS5. I was truly blown away by the DualSense implementation, the vibrant, polished environment, and the sheer joy of platforming. Since that time, Team Asobi has been secretly cooking up a true successor in the form of Astro Bot, and though it may not have landed with the same impact as the original for me, it is bigger and better in almost every other respect. The level of detail and interactability here is rivaled only by Nintendo's mustachioed mascot. Next gen shouldn't be about how many pores you can see on a human face, it should be about how many fucking apples can you smack around with mad physics and just shit flying everywhere. Astro's priorities lie in pure fun for the player, eschewing everything that doesn't align with that goal. The reverence and respect paid to PlayStation history can also not be overlooked, from tiny little references to the cosplaying Astrobots themselves and even fully fledged levels built around classic franchises. This is an absolute love letter to the history of a platform that has now been around for 3 decades. This is a game that puts smiles on faces, and if I was a kid growing up today, I couldn't think of a better introduction to the world of video games and what makes them so special. Number 4. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. If you've followed me for any amount of time, you'll quickly get to know that Metroidvanias are my favourite genre. Though in recent years they have been exclusively in the domain of the independent scene, games like Hollow Knight and the Ori series have owned the zeitgeist, with the only big budget attempts coming from the genre originators at Nintendo. So it was an absolute thrill to see that another AAA company was dipping their toes into this space again, and with a legendary IP to go along with it. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is not only one of the best Metroidvanias ever made, it is the best game Ubisoft has released in a decade and the best Prince of Persia game to boot. This thing is absolutely tremendous on every front. The movement is smooth and silky, with plentiful upgrades and abilities that only make it more of a joy to sail through the world. The combat is snappy, responsive, and surprisingly deep, with combos that lean more character action game than anything else, and the world is huge and interconnected with extremely satisfying secrets and upgrades hidden around every corner. I relish the boss fights, which require precise timing, mastery of the parry, and intense pattern recognition. Any fight that took me more than half an hour to beat was a delight, not a frustration. No, the real frustration lies in the fact that this team that made an astonishingly good game, that put their heart and soul into a love letter to the genre, no longer exists. It is a sad reflection of the state of our industry, and it's hard to know what to do about it. If nothing else, the fact that these guys were able to build something so cool and different as part of the AAA machine is something to be celebrated. Number 3. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I'm a sicko. The Like a Dragon series has truly made me one. I could play one of these games every year for the rest of my life and... Oh, wait, yeah, they probably will end up making one every year for the rest of my life. I think given the sheer prolificness of this team, it would be easy to just pass up each entry and say, oh yeah, that's another one of those. And I think when it comes to awards consideration, it certainly doesn't help them. That said, I really think you should pay attention to Infinite Wealth, because despite it being the 9th mainline entry and the 12th game I've played in this franchise, it still carries that same heart, charm, and hilarity, while also having some of the most standout moments in series history. I spent an entire weekend, and I mean like 20 hours, just playing Dondoko Island, the Animal Crossing inspired sub-game that is an entire video game on its own. I spent a further 15 hours with Sujimon, the second Pokemon-inspired entire other video game in this already massive turn-based video game. And these aren't just run-of-the-mill sub-games. These are fully fleshed out huge things in their own rights, with mechanics, storylines, and everything else to go along with them. The sub-stories here are among the best in the series, with one in particular that I think epitomizes everything I love about the Yakuza games in one extremely goofy yet extremely heartfelt package. But it is the reverence with which they treat Kiryu and his story, his walk down memory lane, as you reflect on the almost 2-decade run that this character has had, that really got me. As someone who played all these games in the space of only a few years, I was still hit by a wave of nostalgia. But also, goddamn is the combat fun. They really improved it in almost every way from the original Like a Dragon and made it something I always wanted to engage in. This game is an absolute mammoth, but tremendously good, and worthy of the Yakuza name. Number 2. Minishoot Adventures. Every year there's a video game that ends up in my top 10 simply because game feel good. I've always been a mechanics first player, and so it is inevitable that my taste will always lead me back to that core of pure video game juice. And let me tell you, Minishoot Adventures is some of the juiciest fucking gaming I've experienced in a long time. What if you took the top-down world design of a 2D Zelda and blended it with a space shooter? A wild idea that somehow is the formula for the hookiest, most satisfying game of the year. The sheer act of shooting and moving feels so good that I was compelled to 100% this game, if only to keep moving and shooting for a bit longer. But it goes further than that. The world is filled with secrets that are a joy to find. It has a really strong sense of progression, with your bullet strength, spread, distance, and more having meaningful upgrades that make you want to keep leveling up to spend those points. The dungeon design leans more combat heavy, but it truly works here because of just how fun the combat is. There is a bullet hell element to this game, especially its bosses, but they somehow find a way to make it both overwhelming and manageable at the same time. There's a real tension to those fights, and yet you always feel like you're able to overcome the odds. This is a game that has really flown under the radar. So if you haven't heard of it but are even remotely interested, I implore you to check it out. A true hidden gem that cannot be missed. Number 1. Metaphor ReFantazio. 2024 has been a great year for video games, don't get me wrong, but closing in on the last few months, I hadn't found something that had truly stolen my heart. A game that deeply spoke to my core. A game that I could confidently say with my full chest was my game of the year. All that changed when I played the demo for Metaphor ReFantazio. From the very opening moment of its initial cutscene, I was immediately invested. This world, its characters, politics, and grounded idealism instantly grabbed my attention and didn't let go for 90 hours. I played and thought of nothing else in the 3-week fever dream I had with this game. And it was for good reason, for not only does Metaphor distill the Persona calendar system, one of the most satisfying loops in gaming, into its most refined and streamlined form yet, it introduces side quests as an additional step in the process, making you feel like you're getting everyone over on the game by knocking tasks out in the most efficient way possible. As someone who never really clicked with the combat in Persona, Metaphor had me hooked from the very start with its elegant take on the SMT press turn system and its incredibly deep archetype tree that had me constantly swapping party members and abilities on the fly. Grinding never felt like a chore, as I always had certain ability or goal in mind that gave me reason to stick around at the end of dungeons. And frankly, who wouldn't want to just jam out to the absolutely astonishing soundtrack for a few more hours anyway? But it is the core message that Metaphor relays through its characters and story that truly resonated with me. As someone who invests deeply in fantastical worlds and feels very strong connections to my favourite pieces of media, what Metaphor conveys about the power of fiction hit home with me on a very personal level. It is without a doubt the best RPG of the year, unquestionably the best work this team has ever created, and unequivocally my game of the year for 2024. And there you have it, my top 10 games for the year 2024. Thank you all for listening and for sticking with me for all these goddamn years. This year's been ridiculous. It's been utterly fucking surreal. And so it's, I just want to say thanks to everybody here, because, yeah, I never thought I'd be able to work in games. And the fact that I have been the past 4 years or so, and have had an incredible year this year in particular, it's all down to you guys, all down to you people who watched my silly Pokemon videos back when I was like 16. So thank you all. I love and appreciate you. And I also would like to shout out a bunch of video games that didn't make the list. Animal Well, I liked it. It was cool. It didn't quite resonate with me, but I thought Animal Well was a very well-made game. I respect it greatly. I think it looks gorgeous and has a stunning atmosphere. Amazing, cool little game. I didn't get Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on here, which is the game you're looking at right now. It's a big RPG in a year of very big RPGs, which is always going to be difficult. It's always going to be challenging. And I like the characters a lot. I really do. I think the performances are tremendous. But I don't know. It's the middle of a game. It's the middle of a game, and so it doesn't have a beginning, middle, end in the same nice way that you want it to. It's very long. It's extremely long, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Hades 2 is not on here because I'm going to wait until next year. If I had included it here, would it have been the number one game? Who could say? It's very fucking good. It's extremely fucking good, so watch out next year for Hades 2. Wuthering Waves, a game that I somehow put like 40 hours into, went down a gacha rabbit hole. Excellent combat, much better than Genshin. Very pretty. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And there's a new Monkey Ball game this year, which I liked quite a bit as well. And then shout out to Gestalt's Demon Cinder, a Metroidvania, and as you know, I like Metroidvanias. And it was a good one. I enjoyed it. Good style, good pixel art, good fun. Anyway, that's going to do us. That's going to be it. Thank you once again for watching this video, listening to this audio, whatever you are so happening to do at this time. And I'll see you next year with another one of these and some more video games. Oh, goodbye.